So we are complete now. Welcome, Casey.
Thank you.
Well, I guess I'll get things started. Thanks very much to Vasek for inviting us. Thanks everybody for coming. I mean, this is a real honor. It's great to be here, and it's great to see so many of you. Some familiar faces, some less familiar faces. If you look at, of course, the projection behind me, who's the Diffractions Collective? I'll try to answer that question. I think Dustin afterwards will take things into sort of a different register, maybe will provide some sort of bedrock, some substrate for all of us to interact on a certain level during the discussion, because after all, this is in fact, in a way, the platform we like to cultivate. It is for us really about the discussion which follows, so it'd be great if maybe we could all participate. We could hear some interesting opinions, questions, and commentaries from you. So, for those who might not know us, we are the Diffractions Collective. Implicitly we are the Diffractions Collective. As such, we do prefer to function collectively, less as in a way individual entities. And I think the work we do, whether it is artistic or whether it regards publications or an online presence, this is always what we in a way aim for. Hence, there's three of us here as well. Now, one of our sort of major focuses at the moment is the website, which you see a screenshot of on the screen. In this regard, our activities are twofold. I do recommend you looking at the site whenever you get a chance, even perhaps now. But there are a lecture series which has been happening for about 2 years now, which is under the auspices of Transit through the invitation, the very gracious invitation and the very gracious treatment we've been getting from Zbigniew Baladran. So that has been happening. I'll talk a bit about that in a few minutes. The second part is more focused on actual publication, online publication. As of now, we might be sort of aiming to change that. So you can check out the Diffractions blog or journal, which has been sort of filling up in the past while with some pretty interesting texts from some pretty interesting people, from some pretty interesting places as well. And I think this brings us to, in a way, the first, how should I say, crux of what we do. And of our activities is always this, how should I say, uneasy tension between our localization and sort of the sphere within which we function. Because one of the axioms which so far has been predicating our work was the fact that we publish in English, and we try to sort of cultivate an English-speaking presence in Prague. We found actually the reception of that to be quite favorable. There's a lot of people here who are willing to write in English and who are willing to sort of take part in our platform or make use of our platform for publication. Perhaps I can even sort of venture an invite here to anybody who might have similar aspirations to perhaps send us your text. And we really do love reading new things, editing them, and then posting them. So that would be a great thing. Perfect. So, as a very sort of general introduction to sort of our topic, the content, which so far I suppose I mentioned the form, the content which and the themes we like to address, the topics which we like to address, whether in our lecture series or on the blog, mostly deal with media theory, geopolitics, warfare, and memetics. In fact, on this note, as a little advertisement, as a little sort of look into the future, we're planning a conference on memetic warfare, in fact, in the next few months. It should be happening in Transit, so keep your eyes open for that. Some of the lectures we've hosted, and which we are very, in a way, really grateful to have hosted, as some of them have not appeared in Prague yet, was Mark Duffield, which you see, or whom you see in the top right corner of the screen. His presentation was on humanitarian design and the spirit of capitalism. It was a fascinating lecture, really, about the geopolitical implications of new technologies and the socioeconomic changes which such technologies engender, or perhaps even fail to engender. there's a very nice, again, picture of an African native using a phone. He had very interesting things to say about that. On the left side, we have Hannah Rose Shell, who was here on residency with the Augusto Foundation, and we were very happy to host her as part of our as one of our lecturers, and she was here to speak about camouflage and photographic surveillance. The third is our most recent lecturer, and this really is a question of the past few months, and that's Robin Yassin Kassab, who was studying the Syrian conflict and was offering an analysis of that. He's also a sci-fi writer, and really the presentation, I recommend you looking at the site, because all these presentations are online and are available. It's unfortunate with Robin, because in the same evening, Metahaven had an event as part of the Photograph Festival, this year's Photograph Festival. So really not many people showed up, which was very unfortunate, because the lecturer, he was really on fire that night, and I really recommend anybody who's interested to perhaps take a look at that. Now, these have been our activities, sort of these twofold activities, which we have been doing. As I mentioned, this is the blog, this is the lecture series. Recently, we've started collaborating with affiliates, with artists. One of them is the BCAA system collective. Shimon right there is actually the if I can say, the daddy of this project, and it was I have to say, a really interesting sort of dynamic which we managed to cultivate, because after all, Diffractions does function on a certain level as this sort of a theoretical engine, this sort of meme machine, which we attempt to sort of operate and to promulgate. Regarding sort of the actual manifestation of that theory, which we perhaps sort of delve in, that's up to many other people. Some of them are artists, digital artists, coders, and various people who are actually able to implement the things that we perhaps unconsciously read, speak of, and then create conceptions for. So we're very grateful that BCAA took it upon themselves to actually make this project happen. And the project I'm speaking about is Sinovation Limited. This whole project, it's online on BCAA system. If you Google BCAA system, Sinovation, it'll be the first link, if I'm not mistaken. It was a 360-degree video, which on the Oculus Rift really does look wonderful. Unfortunately, for most people, still the technological limitations are pressing. So you can see it on YouTube in the standard 360-degree mode. Perhaps there's no need to really delve too deeply into it, as you can see it for yourself. But the general concept was that we took, in a way, the idea of Sinofuturism as a type of a signifier, as a meme, as a term, which Sinofuturism is the brainchild of Lawrence Leck from his video essay, Sinofuturism 1839 to 2046, and where he presents a really sort of a robust and really at the same time aesthetic should I say, a hack, a sort of mutation of a type of accelerationist aesthetic, perhaps, fused with a very strong betting in Chinese history and Chinese contemporary society, including their vast investments into supercomputation, super AI, and other elements. Now, perhaps what will be more instructive in this sense is for you to really get a feel for this last project that we did with BCAA. I think this really encapsulates it really well. We took the seven sort of terms, seven concepts of Leck, which he presents in his video essay. These are gaming, gambling, computation, addiction, studying, and labor. And we superimposed them with the traditional 8 trigrams of the I Ching as they appear in the I Ching Book of Changes. So there's this, in a way, this how should I say, syncretism of the contemporary, of the modern, with the really ancient. In fact, for those of you who don't know, I Ching is supposedly the oldest book in the world, and it is a method of divination. I think here perhaps this project really delved into the mystical aspects of acceleration, especially right acceleration, but I don't think we need to talk about that specifically here. What I think suffices to say is that we, in Diffractions, we really try to work on memes, and we try to let memes to work on us. And in that sense, memetics really sort of constitute a fundamental aspect of both our perhaps writing and both our aesthetic production, which we do again in tandem with various subjects. We have a question, perhaps. Okay, Michal, please. What is your question? Okay. Okay. No, we can do that. We can do that. I think. Honestly, I think Dustin will really get into this in his part of the presentation. Suffice it to say, for those who might be struggling with the term meme, I mean, the etymology is a portmanteau word with gene, and it's defined as a self-replicating unit of culture. The first mention was in Richard Dawkins' 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, and it really has developed since then. It's really becoming a sort of a very important force in a way, and a very important trope in, I think, today's political discourse, through Trump, of course, through Facebook, through the digital sphere, which actually conditions and again propagates our thinking in this semiosphere in the broadest sense possible. But as I said, Dustin will riff on that actually extensively. It'd be great if we could maybe talk about this during the discussion session, which will follow. All right, this is the last slide for Sino-Futurism. There's a little text which goes along with it. Again, done by Shimon Levitner, who's sitting over there. A really nice job, I have to say. Thanks, Shimon. All right, this is another thing that we did, and now this is a bit iffy, difficult for us to really talk about Caldera, because it's you could say an affiliate organization, which so far has not been getting much attention. Their presence was felt at the recent Transmit festival, which was curated by Dalibor Knap and happened just about a month and a half ago, where Caldera was recruiting for their various activities, whether nefarious or benign. We will let you decide. But this is a bit of a work in progress. We are in relations, in commerce with them. So maybe, to speak less, if you can look at some sort of very basic concepts here, which Diffractions as a whole attempts to grapple with, attempts to make use of. Of course, they are very broad. They might be a bit idiosyncratic, but perhaps, if I can venture the opinion that this is where the real, in a way, strength of Diffractions lies, is that it is a distributed system. It is, in a way, a type of cyborg, a type of aggregate, a type of hybrid, which fluctuates, which is not tied to any institution consistently, and as such, for us, I think it really is a sort of source of some very interesting overlaps, some very interesting processes which unfold. Now, I think I'll leave off here, and I'll leave you here with this sort of perhaps question. You can read there: disruption / cohesion and meme machine. And I think it's interesting to perhaps think about and reflect on some of the studies which postulate that actually memes always favor disruption, and that institutions are very unable to use memes productively. And we can see many examples of this happening, whether it's the NYPD police or others, where memes sort of promulgated from the institutional sphere simply don't have as much traction, and they seem to disappear in natural selection, or get hacked, or get deturned towards disruptive ends. I think I'll leave off here and give the floor to Dustin. Yeah, getting there, yeah, I see Pepe. F5. And here we go.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Because I would prefer not to use the mic, if that's okay. Yeah? Okay. Or is it too loud? If I'm too loud, let me know. But I'll get something into the microphone. Okay, yeah, so I'll just, might be better that way. Okay, so, as Veet kind of outlined what Diffractions, or us as a collective, are focused on. So we're focused on, as he was pointing out, multiple things. Particularly, I think right now, he was pointing out the Caldera cognitive security. So this has kind of been a thread or a theme that we've been building upon, looking, as it says there, cognitive security, and another concept that's on that screen, neuro-totalitarianism. So I will get into that just in a moment. However, cognitive security and kind of this project that we just discussed about called Caldera Cognitive Security, it's really influenced and has been influenced due to a lot of the news events, or a lot of interest that's been occurring concerning what's going on, especially if we're looking at ransomware or malware attacks. We're looking at how, for example, artificial intelligence, and we're also looking how artificial intelligence is influencing and kind of reshaping our perception and our kind of understanding and our feeling of, let's say, comfort and simply security about ourselves, and of course with the interfaces and the machines that we're using on an everyday basis. So I will get into that briefly in a moment. So this is kind of going to this idea that I was talking about, neuro-totalitarianism, even though it's not directly related. But lately, I think we're more or less interested in, as it says up there, social media is a denial of service attack on your mind. So actually, I'm taking this from James Williams, who is a kind of social network ethicist, and who's really studying kind of the damaging effects that social networks are having, especially on our perception, and how it's really eroding our capabilities or capacities, let's say, to do such things, let's say, as concerning about politics, concerning about politics. And so what I'm interested in, or what we're interested particularly here, as you see right there, it says attention economy, attention is a resource. So looking at this idea about how attention is a resource, we're very interested in this idea, in this day of age, how attention is a commodity itself. So simply, as you see right now, someone is calling me. Simply, all of you are on your phones, because I know half of what we're talking about is particularly boring. I get it to that point. So, but I'm interested in this effect of what it's doing. What it's doing, of course, as I was talking about, is it's eroding my perception, it's eroding my capability and capacity, let's say, to hold my attention onto certain things. And as it's also saying right there, there's the dopamine addiction feedback loop. So, particularly what we're also interested in kind of studying is the effects of, how with your social networks, how receiving that instant message, how going on your news feed, how you're constantly updated, how you're constantly feeding in and trying to basically be knowing what's going on, the fear of missing out kind of concept. And so the basic premise here you can think about is that in order to be contemporary, in order to be updated, you need to be distracted, basically. So this is the kind of idea of looking about multitasking as well, where there's been various studies looking to when we're constantly trying to multitask, our prefrontal cortex, so part of our brain up here, which is also part of our brain that's always looking for, let's say, new types of new and novel types of things, whether we're looking at something for the first time or listening to something for the first time, whether we're watching something for the first time. This is also part of the brain prefrontal cortex, which is important to be able to calculate, to be able to rationalize, to be able also to really evaluate our decisions. So if I would say anything that we're really genuinely interested in right now is, yes, the hijacking of the mind, how the mind's capabilities or our capacities to really frame things, to really understand and grasp things is really eroding. So that's why I would say, leading into our next kind of discussion about what cognitive security is, I'll get into that. Has actually anyone heard this term cognitive security before? Because actually there's a company in Czech Republic which was one of the first kind of promulgators or the first developers of this idea of cognitive security. They actually got bought out by Cisco, it was another kind of major kind of security firm. But importantly, what cognitive security is, and I want to kind of underline that if you see it in bold, it says, cognitive security is a term that examines an evolving frontier and suggests that in the future, I'm sorry I got cut off, that researchers, governments, social platforms, and private actors may be engaged in a continual arms race to influence and protect from influence large groups of users online. So, Casey, do you want to maybe give an idea about what social engineering is? Because I think social engineering, if people are more or less familiar with that, will kind of give maybe a basis for how cognitive security is different. If you want to use this one. So maybe just start.
Cool. Hi. All right, social engineering. So you are all being social engineers at the moment? Hey.
Mm-hmm. That's actually from Nicholas Carr. Yeah, you're talking about in the double quotations. Yeah, that's from Nicholas Carr. It's actually a really good book called The Shallows. I would strongly recommend that because that's also looking at the negative impact and then adverse effects of social networks and the internet as well. So he does some really interesting theories. Perhaps it was, yes. Unconsciously, that's what a meme does. So I got hijacked in that case.
A little bit of the co-memification of capitalism.
Yes. Okay, so if you wanted to give a basic
Sure.
outline.
Quick thing on social engineering, to give a small part of it. You guys have all probably heard of the name social engineering or going through as the term. It really came into the limelight when John McAfee was claiming to be able to hack that iPhone from the San Bernardino terrorists. So if you had that, he said, I'll decrypt that San Bernardino phone free of charge so Apple doesn't need to place a backdoor on its own product. So you guys are familiar with the situation with the Apple phone of the terrorist, and we were all concerned that America was sticking backdoors into iPhones, and we didn't want to get there. Well, John McAfee offered to do that without the use of any tech solution to it. He was going to social engineer some Apple worker to provide him the backdoor himself, so he wouldn't need to make an exception to all iPhones in that case. So that's where the term came into the limelight. And in culture, you might have also heard of the series Mr. Robot. There's lots of prime examples of the famous social engineering hacks that went through. So if you guys can catch that for a nice example. Mr. Robot itself is a social engineering project that they do a really good job at it. Where does it begin? The name connotates some kind of scientific approach, engineering. Anytime you say scientific with a hand like this must be pretty believable. But it's a continuation of the social sciences, and where you take it further from the scientific part of things in the scientific process of taking data and taking observation and putting it into a hypothesis and linking it through that. So social engineering comes to the point of taking a social science principle or social science incident and turn it into an engineering project. So changing the outcome and changing it for your intent and your purpose. It's a major term in cybersecurity, and that is which really has hijacked the term social engineering, which was kind of developed back in the 70s and 80s, going on through information operations campaigns, persuasion, and these kind of operations taken up by governments and military. The main name back in that time for engineering a mass group was psychological operations or information operations. And now the term has been broadened to social engineering to connotate in a different way. But it is all about changing mass amount of minds for the purpose of moving them in a certain direction, or for persuasion, basically. So social engineering comes down to that. It's been entirely hijacked by the cybersecurity realm to specifically mean that the exchange of passwords, basically. So from a social engineer to a social engineered or a victim, passing a password or a key code to that social engineer. It can have multiple meanings. If you guys are familiar with phishing or spear phishing attempts from those weird emails you get about Viagra, or the Nigerian prince trying to sell you a house, and you guys have probably not been social engineered very well then. Maybe you have a good spam box where all that social engineering stuff goes to. Some rules don't apply. So that's where we have it in the mainstay today, and it really links us into Diffractions, cognitive security principles, and mimetic warfare. We do truly look in the eyes of the martial gaze from our previous speaker, Antoine Bousquet, applying a warfare perspective to it all. There is a security aspect to it all, so we're exploring that realm of it. And mimetic warfare is the next step into social engineering on a mass scale.
Yeah. So just to give you more of a concrete example, are people familiar with what happened in 2014, the Facebook experiment?
Which Facebook experiment?
Yeah, I know, that's the question. Yes, but okay, well, yeah, I haven't heard about this one. But this is the notorious one that I'm talking about is in 2014, where Facebook actually conducted an experiment on over about 689,000 users, where what they were doing is they were manipulating people's news feeds. So they were observing your news feeds, and for example, they were observing the content that was uploaded on your news feeds, and let's say particularly what you would be writing on your news feeds. So for example, if you were posting positive things, what Facebook was doing, and basically the developers, is they were filtering out only positive content to see if you, whether you have a friend or whether people you know, are going to actually also post positive things. On the opposite side, they were doing something where, for example, if someone was just posting negative things as well, they wanted to see if there was a link that, since I post something negative, if Veet or if Casey would be posting something negative. And yes, the kind of consensus and kind of the conclusion to their experiment was yes, that just by manipulation of information and kind of filtering of this information, you're also kind of able to kind of control minds, or actually in one of their publications, they call it an emotional contagion, meaning simply that, and this is what I'm talking about with cognitive security, and as Casey was talking about with social engineering, because social engineering too is more geared towards individual kind of cases, where something with cognitive security, as this definition shows, is that when you can have large groups of people that can be influenced and that can be persuaded and swayed if you have the tools and if you have the techniques to do so. So that's why, furthermore, yes, this is why we have kind of the emphasis. I'm pulling this kind of definition that there was a symposium in 2014 by this advanced artificial intelligence kind of gathering. And as they point out there, what they're saying is that yes, cognitive security focuses on the exploitation of cognitive biases in large public groups. So those biases can be extremely simple. I mean, if any of you are using your Twitter, if you're using your Facebook, you're using your social networks, you might be receiving obviously a link from someone who has an image or some type of profile that appears legitimate, appears like a human, and you'll click on that link. And of course, it could be something where it's injecting malware, or it's injecting something that would be putting like a backdoor on your computer. So in that case, they can be able to observe and actively manipulate your kind of emotions. Your emotions, and also kind of studying in your response, let's say, to certain types of inputs or certain types of injections. So that's why another kind of important key focus here is, as it says there, quantitative measurement. So with this kind of cognitive security field, this quantitative measurement is, as I was just pointing out with the Facebook example, how they're collecting statistics on what they can do to you to basically manipulate you and kind of steer and influence you and kind of believing or thinking in something. So moreover, there's kind of another thing that I think is like another thread that particularly we've been interested in, and actually something I'm also kind of tying into the work that we're doing. So it's this kind of concept of obfuscation. So if you see on the left square, does anyone know what that left square is, or has any idea?
From the movie Arrival, right?
Yes, from the movie Arrival. So, no, it's not Arrival. Actually, that's a radar display during World War II. So what actually would be occurring during World War II? So let me give you a brief definition as to what obfuscation is. So obfuscation is this idea that where you're kind of sending out signals to another system, and this other system is trying to pick up these signals and filter these signals and pick up what's important information, for example, to let's say track you, or to kind of have some idea as to what more or less are going to be your responses. So to give you a more concrete example, what that left-hand picture is showing is a radar screen, because during World War II, what would happen is there would be basically airplanes. So we know with radar systems are picking up and tracking the movement of airplanes as, let's say, they're getting closer to an air base, or whether they're getting closer to an encampment or a military base or whatever. So this is what we call countermeasures. So what airplanes would do is they would release what we call chafe, and what this would be is aluminum foil kind of strips. They would cut down these aluminum foil strips, and what the airplanes would do is, since they would know they would be kind of near these kind of radar kind of detection guns or slash kind of towers, is they would release this kind of chafe. And by releasing this type of chafe, what they would do is, as you see in that radar display, they would have a difficult time to kind of figure out what the exact location was of that specific airplane. So it's a way of kind of hiding and concealing your movements and figuring out what you are particularly going to do. Similarly, we can look at this as to what's going on in the right-hand picture. Is anybody familiar with that? That's an orb-weaving spider. And so what this orb-weaving spider, yes, I'm getting a DDoS attack on me. So what an orb-weaving spider does is, as you see in that spider web there, this orb-weaving spider is a very small spider. And in order to, let's say, find prey, it has to also at the same time realize that there are wasps that are basically trying to find it and detect it and are predatory towards it. So what this orb-weaving spider does is it actually makes a spider out of kind of all the particles and all of the kind of, even its kind of old web, and also everything that it's consumed. So what it's done is it's actually made kind of a mirror image, if you will, of maybe not quite a mirror image, but it's basically made a stand-in for itself. So this stand-in enables the orb-weaving spider to actually go after its predators or after its prey. So these are kind of two basic ideas or two kind of basic examples. So, and furthermore, if you look at kind of give that definition, the whole idea behind obfuscation, as I said, is that you're trying to create ambiguous and confusing or misleading information to interfere with surveillance and data collection as well. And so you can actually also see what's going on. I don't know if people are following their Twitter or Facebook, or have been following especially what Russia is doing, or actually what Chinese government is doing. So Russia's really notorious for this, especially during 2011. What the Russian government was doing is they were monitoring Twitter feeds, because what was going on in 2011 is there was there were protests and demonstrations going concerning the election of Putin at that time, and how they felt that that election was obviously botched in favor of Putin. So what the government was doing, this kind of Internet Research Agency, this is the organization that Putin kind of relies on to carry out these attacks, is they were monitoring the Twitter feeds and looking at the Twitter feeds and the hashtags. So with these hashtags, hashtags are enabling, let's say, the potential protesters or demonstrators to follow and have a live update as to where they're going to be demonstrating or where they're going to meet. So what the Russian government / Internet Research Agency did is they basically monitored those Twitter feeds and they monitored the hashtags, and then they started basically putting the most random information with the hashtag. So you, as a user, if you're trying to track and have some information about where I'm going to meet, where I'm going to demonstrate, cannot follow. You cannot have any idea what's going on here, or where to meet or where to demonstrate. So again, this is another form of kind of disrupting the communication channels. So furthermore, yeah.
Social engineering terms, that's just called a red herring. If you have red herrings, it's something that leads you on a wild goose chase to waste the time or to distract, obfuscate.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just using it in this way.
Yeah, it definitely is about distraction and time. I mean, time again is the commodity here. Time again is really the essence, because I mean, if you can somehow, some way make it more difficult for you as a user to kind of locate or to find relevant information, then that's going to kind of drain your mental energy, and that's going to really drain your ability to really want to go out and seek this information, unless you are really adamant or really determined to do so. So another kind of interesting experiment that was done, is anyone familiar with September 11th, 2014? No? Okay. So this is another case and example that the kind of Internet Research Agency did, where they actually targeted US citizens in this small town in Louisiana. So in this small town of Louisiana, what the Internet Research Agency did is they collected information on basically the residents and their phone numbers. So they collected their phone numbers. What they also did is they were able to kind of doctor and also generate kind of fake and false images of a CNN video showing a chemical processing plant being blown up. And they used Twitter as well to kind of circulate this kind of information with the image of this kind of apparent blown up chemical processing plant. And in addition to that, they created a Wikipedia page. At the same time, with the Wikipedia page, I'm sorry, that's doesn't come in high resolution there, but as that Wikipedia page shows there, is they're actually giving a record of an event of this false event that happened where the chemical processing plant was blown up. And they also created another video where this video actually shows like ISIS taking, ISIS saying that they were responsible for this whole incident that happened there. And as I said before, with the collection of all the town's persons and their phone numbers, they were sending out text messages. And the text messages were appearing from kind of the local municipality to warn people that there's been a chemical processing plant attack. So these are kind of really the implications of creating as much mass confusion. And as I said before, this is kind of the obfuscation aspect, but this is also kind of feeding into this idea how now false information creates real events. And we're basically in this day of age. So moreover, hold on. All right, so next question. Are people familiar with this video? Has anybody seen artificial intelligence and Barack Obama? So one person, I suppose? Okay. So I will let you watch this for a couple minutes, and I will give you just a basic rundown.
Given this audio as input,
It's been less than a week since the deadliest mass shooting in American history.
our method produces the following output.
It's been less than a week since the deadliest mass shooting in American history. And foremost in all of our minds has been the loss and the grief felt by the people of Orlando,
Here's the ground truth video of Obama saying the same words.
especially our friends who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. I visited with the families of many of the victims on Thursday, and one thing I told them is that they're not alone.
To demonstrate the power of the method, we apply the same input speech mapped to 4 different target videos. Note that all 4 are synthetic and have different lighting conditions.
The auto industry, to help families refinance their homes, to invest in things like high-tech manufacturing, clean energy, and the infrastructure that creates good new jobs. Not to mention the job training that helps folks earn new skills to fill those jobs.
Okay, so we can also think about the implications of this. Consider in the future your governments, consider in the future mercenaries, consider in the future paramilitary, consider in the future anyone, I mean not just anyone, of course it might not be in everyone's hands, but since this kind of, we're talking about how these technologies are becoming increasingly accessible and democratized, consider the implications where more and more people will have possibly the ability to kind of replicate, to mimic certain types of figures, certain types of personalities, certain important figures to spread and disseminate this type of false information. So this is actually really legitimately becoming a concern because even during the 2016 elections with Trump, between Trump and Hillary, or Miss Clinton, or as they were calling it, Hitlery, because actually some bots were actually able to release this information of calling her Hitlery and doctoring all these interesting stories about her. That this is actually also becoming a legitimate concern in the field. Just consider the fact that anybody, I hate using these terms anybody, but there are going to be groups of people susceptible to believing these types of videos. And again, as I want to reiterate, it comes down to time. Because, I mean, we can all have this ability to think, oh, you know, what we call a hindsight bias, or what we were talking about before with these cognitive biases we have, like, oh, I knew that that was a fake video, you know, a long time ago. But really, if you are thinking, if you're in that kind of moment and you're watching these types of videos, or you're kind of getting exposed to this type of information, I mean, it really does show that you should not probably overestimate your capacity or your capability to kind of discern whether the information is true or false. I mean, even these types of videos can simply kind of produce, you know, mass hysteria. So I think this video might be actually really good for Mr. Zaman, since he's kind of becoming increasingly old.
I can add on that with this point. With social engineering, it really takes advantage of your bioware, as you as a human who is a piece of organic material that's not able to comprehend too much beyond that synchronization of it. And this is a specific example of using the McGurk effect to pronounce the size, the way the mouth works with it. So the McGurk effect is the way your mind synthesizes the sound with the lip movement. So it's the basic principle in lip reading. So when you see an F or a P, the only difference in that I can play whatever sound I want on top of my fa or pa sound, and you're going to see just my lips, it's going to produce the sound that, your brain is going to produce the sound that you hear rather than what I'm saying with my mouth. It changes the way you perceive that. So social engineering comes down to that and taking advantage of the shortcuts and heuristics that our evolutionary brains have come to become to. So.
Okay, so
That was machine learning that came
yeah,
through.
that was a
Yeah,
recurrent
it
neural network.
played it through and then.
Yeah. So sorry, let me just catch up. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so I think, yes. So I will try to wrap this up really quickly. But I'm very, are people familiar with Panther Moderns? Anyone read Neuromancer? Yes, so, okay, maybe you didn't remember. Yeah, I mean, this has been a long time, but I mean, I really like this idea of what William Gibson is talking about, these kind of techno-nihilistic, fetishistic, kind of situationist guys that are kind of, again, using these hybrid technologies and advanced technologies to, again, kind of produce and simulate and create these kind of fictional situations, which I think ties into this kind of quote up there by Cybernetic Cultural Research Unit, CCRU, which I think is more and more becoming the case, that really reality in this day of age is understood to be composed of fictions, like fictional, consistent semiotic terrains that condition perceptual, affective, and behavioral responses. So it's working on multiple levels that we are all reacting and responding to events. And these events or these kind of fictions, it's who basically has a monopoly on the narrative and who has a monopoly to kind of engineer the narrative and engineer the fiction into reality as well. So I think to kind of wrap it up, or I'm sure people are familiar with the Kilroy was here. This is probably one of the most famous memes that you would see throughout Europe after World War II. So I guess I'll get into that kind of definition of a meme. So as Veet was talking about before, so yeah, as he was saying, we're talking about Richard Dawkins and his book, The Selfish Gene. He was looking at this idea, what do we talk about with information or certain types of behaviors or certain types of rituals, certain types of traditions that kind of replicate or that can be reproduced. And so he looks at it from also this angle, from this end of natural selection. So natural selection in this sense of what's going to maximize the survival for information or certain types of rituals or certain types of traditions to kind of go through the next round of reproduction. So the thing about memes, as we can think about it, is something that's craving on your neural cells. It's something that's captured your neural cells, and by capturing your neural cells, it's kind of it's firmly rooted itself into being able to reproduce itself, and thus for us to enact it and perform it. I mean, so memes can be the most basic thing too, I would say, even from evolutionary terms. Going back when we had to learn how to make fires, and making fires so we can kind of even distribute this type of technology and distribute this type of ability for all of us within kind of tribal-like settings to reproduce. It could be such things as songs, it could be such things as fashion, such things that all of us right now are looking or appearing or talking about in a way. Did you want to add on concerning with the memes? So probably, this is not Pepe. It's probably, yeah. This is actually Greypoor. He's the kind of, the more kind of malevolent Pepe. So I would assume are you familiar with Pepe? Or have you seen Pepe before? You've probably seen the frog and how it's been, sorry? You know the black Pepe, yes. So yes, this Pepe has been kind of one of the most notorious kind of memes, internet memes, that has been kind of used for some pretty questionable and pretty terrible purposes. Actually, Vashik, can you, yes. Yeah, so maybe, as we see here, this, I don't know, are people familiar with this book? It's a relatively decent overview of kind of alt-right, 4chan, 8chan, these kind of amphibious corners of the internet that have been largely considered, I wouldn't say responsible, but they've been kind of a catalyst for helping Trump get elected, or they've believed themselves to be, even though this is, I think it's a far more complex conversation than. But of course, we see the frog here. So it's quite interesting. You see that term up there, it says egregore. So this egregore term has been kind of used and kind of invoked to talk about like a hive mind. So, for example, using something such as Pepe as this kind of cultural symbol that for a lot of these guys, as this book kind of explicates or talks about, guys who are feeling more or less kind of really resentful of political culture, political correctness culture, feeling at the same time that they have been kind of dispossessed. They're not the guys that go out and have their regular jobs. They're the guys who kind of live in the basements. They're the guys who are kind of fed up with kind of contemporary reality.
Just Bitcoin miners today,
and
right?
Bitcoin miners as well today, yes. This idea of egregore, as I just said, is kind of when you're evoking some type of spiritual or some type of mental entity. And by invoking this spiritual or mental entity, you are thinking that you're invoking some type of, let's say, real material force. And you're kind of doing a tradition to do so. So, probably our most basic egregore is Christmas/Santa Claus. Because by going through this whole process and this whole ritual, you know, when we're younger and when our parents are basically, you know, kind of more or less convincing us, I know I'm American, so that's probably a different story than here, that yes, they're kind of feeding it and kind of feeding it into us that yes, there is this type of entity that's real, that's, you know, giving the presents and giving us, you know, all the joys and all the great things that come with consumerism. That you can think about how this undergoing this type of ritual that, you know, just by the image of Santa Claus, just by the discussion of Santa Claus, just by kind of coming together and thinking about this entity, that it actually has real material effects. And so this is kind of the idea that kind of 4chan and 8chan and these kind of amphibious corners of the internet think about. Because for the frog, what the frog symbolizes is it comes from Egyptian mythology. It comes from this guy, Kek. Because in Egyptian mythology, Kek is considered one of the original kind of primordial gods, and he's kind of a god that represents chaos. He's like the primordial god of chaos. Or yes, come in.
Disclaimer.
Chip in, please.
It doesn't come from Egyptian. It's like it's
probably
a universally adaptable symbol.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't think you can really pinpoint it in Egypt.
Okay. It definitely is, but they like to.
Moses, man. It's the second plague, man. Moses in the. I won't argue that.
No, I totally understand. It's just that's how they kind of like to create the narrative of it going back to this kind of god of primordial god of darkness. And so kind of using this kind of primordial god of darkness, they're looking into these archetypes and how this kind of archetype induced so much chaos in the whole kind of cultural social realm because someone like Trump came in and Trump was the complete disruptor, kind of the, I guess the whore of Babylon that comes in and kind of destroys the whole.
I was gonna say the frog that kissed the princess.
Yes, but all these
this
things.
archetype.
Yeah. So yeah, as Vita's talking about, we're going to actually have a conference coming in May concerning kind of meme warfare. So we'll be particularly looking at the kind of 4chan and 8chan. That will be kind of one aspect, and overall we'll be having kind of a perspective or kind of investigation as to what memes are, and even kind of looking at kind of ritual aspects. I don't know, did you want to elaborate any further on that?
No.
Okay. So I hope this...
It's not mimetic enough.
Yeah, it's not mimetic enough, yeah. But, not yet. Yeah. So if anything, I hope this kind of summarizes what we're focusing on and doing as kind of a collective. So, yeah. All right, thank you. Yeah, so...
Any questions?
Or we can come, we can maybe reconfigure the chairs, I don't know.
Yeah.
Grab some water. Like, thank you for it. It was amazing performance anyway. And now the questions.
And wait, just really quick, disclaimer-wise. I mean, don't just think we all have answers, because I know there's definitely people in the audience too who should. So I mean, I would suggest if we have questions, open it up also to the audience, because I think we're only a very small element of engaging in this whole kind of memetics kind of warfare and also these kind of things. So
I think you can answer this one.
okay, if you want.
What type of pepper is your favorite one?
I like the black.
Can
pepper.
you show us?
I like the black pepper that you have.
No.
The gypsy pepper, I think that's the most
Yeah.
interesting one. Yeah.
Oh.
I like the hieroglyphic version.
Mine's sad Pepe, definitely.
Mimetic warfare.
Sad Pepe.
But that's actually an interesting point, maybe to bring up, because I think this is concerning the whole Pepe, and probably what really made it kind of resonate for a lot of people is, I'm sure as Mikhail asked, what's your favorite type of Pepe? Pepe was kind of this figure that a lot of people could customize. So you have this kind of gypsy Pepe. You could see, unfortunately, the Pepe of Donald Trump, the Hitler Pepe. You could see the sad Pepe. You can see, the Pepe that lives in his basement. So it's this kind of archetype phenomenon that a lot of people can kind of invest their kind of emotional and narrative energies in to kind of creating their own kind of way of, having some type of effect on their own narrative and sharing it with others, which I think was really important about kind of memes, as I'm understanding. So, yeah. Okay.
I'd like to pick up on the AI topic and Musk's Neuralink. Like if you have any kind of firm position on what Elon is trying to do with this Neuralink, with like installing some sort of AI, or I'm not even sure like what specific shape it would take, but the argument for it that interests me is that that there's this position that like advanced AI is already inevitable, it's going to be among us, and it's very dangerous. So if one of the ways how to secure it is to lock it into that it would still be somehow under your control in your own brain. So like I would like to know what you think of this, if you have a position on Musk's Neuralink and this android transhumanist.
Well, for me,
Open it up to the audience too.
True,
I think that would be.
Point of view as such as an ethical point of view, or more information about it? Okay.
if Musk is evil or AI is evil? Okay, I wouldn't like to maybe as sort of venture an ethical standpoint here, but I think what is interesting is that you actually have Musk as sort of the corporate elite, the sort of market leaders, the world leaders perhaps, and he's actually consciously sort of reneging on this, like, how should I say, the sublime, the futurist sublime, which many other transhumanist thinkers are not, and they're like very like techno-optimistic to, for me, perhaps unstomachable degree. So I think it's interesting that you see perhaps certain individuals within the actual field and within the economic sphere already talking about these things, anyway, curbing their own perhaps hubris, if I can say.
Does anyone else want to chip in? Because I think there's also some people.
I just had a reaction on the side. Well, we have seen one of the principles, evolutionary theory, and I would say a word like evil is just like not anywhere within my vocabulary. And I sort of believe, like, you have both good and bad effects of whatever new technology is coming, and whatever people are doing with it, in whatever way they're messing with it. There are positive and negative effects. I just don't think there is any place for.
You yourself implant a chip that would augment your intellectual capacities in your brain.
Is that available for me? Please, please. Right now I don't have an answer to that.
I think maybe a sort of a middle ground where we could talk about a similar thing is the fusion of the subject, the human, with this sort of platform capitalism, and I'm talking like a Google eyeglass, right? And these things, like, would you wear it 24/7? Would you have a contact lens implanted in your eye to actually constantly be reading feeds and various augmented reality images or moving images? I think that's maybe a sort of more approachable approach.
I think the question boils down to whether your question is anthropocentric or not anthropocentric. Is your question anthropocentric, or is it not anthropocentric in how?
More like individual, like if you yourselves, if you have a take on this, that
Well, I think, I mean, it's difficult for us to imagine what such, enhanced cognitive capabilities would do, but we can fairly easily imagine what being wired into Facebook, 12 hours a day would do. So maybe again,
Just
I
taking
think that's,
drugs.
or
What does that do to your?
or taking drugs. Don't do drugs.
Is that on the same spectrum? I mean, what do we put it in that spectrum? Is it a shamanic journey to accept the AI and the AI? Is it artificial at that point? Is my question.
We'll just constantly be finding adaptations to that, I guess.
I might have a question, maybe. I don't know if it's the interesting question or not, but you mentioned a lot of examples of how the social network feeding with the kind of fake news is shaping the minds of the respondents, but this strategy is here actually for a long time, and going back to the beginnings of the internet, there was always a notion of some fictional character, of a hacker or a person who can act within the networks, and usually is acting against the companies or the big players on some kind of a romantic Robin Hood character, maybe. And so what happened with this notion of this subversive agent who actually acted also in the work of many artists? We can name numerous projects that deal with the tactical media approach. And but now it seems like this level of subversive acting is kind of disappearing, because we have subversive actors that actually act in favor of governments and yeah. So would you have some comment about that?
I mean, maybe I can just throw something out there and maybe we can go back and forth that. But I mean, when you say one of the major reasons for it is, of course, more and more the internet becoming integrated within kind of the wider kind of economic capitalist platform aesthetic. I mean, because actually one of the interesting points that I didn't bring up is, we were talking about cognitive security and we're looking at, the Trump election and, who was peddling these types of fake news. It was actually these kids from Macedonia, and coming from a very small town, poor town, Macedonia, and they're creating these fake websites and creating this fake news in order just to do the pay-per-click, kind of procedure / engineering operation. And by doing that, for them, that obviously is kind of considered being kind of the renegade or being this type of figure. From our eyes, that's completely terrible or completely incomprehensible that someone would like to peddle fake news because it's favoring some type of candidate. But I mean, from their eyes, it's simply, I would say, an aspect of more and more the internet becoming accessible, and with the intersection of kind of their material conditions. They're not coming from really wealthy conditions. So that's kind of my take on it. You're probably far more familiar with kind of the whole kind of the beginnings of internet and all those things. So. But I would see it that from that angle and from that lens.
I would maybe make the connection of, because you quite cogently spoke about the romanticization of the hacker, and I mean, what you have nowadays, I mean, the hacker has moved in a way into anonymous, right? And I think that there's this waking up to the fact that all these endeavors are first always a priori political, but also they're always in some way shared and disseminated, and always like a group effort. And I think perhaps with the Diffractions collective, we do try to bring this sort of into the forefront, that artist as individual, hero worship of the artist is nowadays definitely an untenable sort of approach. Perhaps it always has been,
Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question though. I mean, because go on.
I can give my spiel on that, I guess.
Give your spiel.
Yeah, just to go on that question, I guess I would draw a line between the creation of aliases and persona on the outside to obscure yourself on the playing field, and then the archetypal nature that develops from that. So when you guys talk about the sharing and the networking of it, that's that step into the new memetics. And I would compare that in the new age now new age, it's a really bad descriptor, but today with social networks and everything, is now we have a kind of a new form of a ghost in the shell complex. You have a new standalone complex where something has emerged out of copies and copies and copies of nothing, or without an originator. And so that that movement from the aliases multiplying into a kind of archetype.
Obfuscation.
Yeah.
It's an obfuscation
Yeah.
principle. Yeah.
But it's kind of doubled into something that we as humans can no longer observe to the point of where did this extra entity come from?
So that would be interesting thinking about how artificial intelligence would just be, because I think that's getting to that level of artificial intelligence coming to the level of sophistication where, you know, you just have these bots, you know, basically trying to see how they can outmaneuver and how they can kind of outsmart each other, because that's actually increasingly becoming the case from what I've been reading, especially on these Twitter accounts, that even the bots now can't even figure out if that's another bot on the other side or if that's actually legitimately another kind of human, even though I don't think a bot really has a conception of a human, because it's just looking, from what I'm understanding, it's just kind of a statistical probability. So
The Voight-Kampf test. Man.
yeah, from what I'm gathering. David. My roommate David. Hello.
Joe. Do you see the reason the left or post-left or any emancipatory forces whatsoever have no egregores? And what would need to change?
Wait, can you say it again?
The reason the left or post-left or whatever emancipatory forces have no such egregores.
Such egos? Yeah, I mean such a thing as Pepe or
anything like alt-right, you know this.
No, did you want to take that, or because I don't want to monopolize? If you guys want to take that,
I think there's a good part of Allegorithms that actually covers that as well. But
no, I think that's an interesting point that's been brought up, especially during. If I may go back, thinking about what was kind of the difference between the Trump and Hillary Clinton elections too, is that, and I think it even goes back to a more kind of fundamental, basic point, is that. You know, Trump really embraced these kind of media tactics, these kind of, you know, Pepe. He really embraced, you know, this ability for himself to create narrations and create a narrative for people to be able to kind of pick up and understand simply why the other opponent is bad, why Hillary is bad, because she does this, because she does that, she has a history of this and that and that. Where, I mean, even though this isn't completely true about Hillary and her kind of opposition to Trump, she was just focusing on her being a female, her kind of having these facts about Trump, and not really trying to build up the narrative about it. And you can see, I mean, especially with these kind of egregores, that's the kind of, from what I've gathered, from what I understand, you are, you know, as you see this kind of process, I know we were talking about before, it's not completely an Egyptian mythology idea. However, kind of tapping back into these kind of archetype, tapping back into these kind of symbols, that, you know, do have kind of thousands of years of history, and being able to kind of customize them and being able to kind of renew the vision of them and kind of update them in kind of contemporary times. I think for a lot of people that's a sense of agency that I think is really, for a lot of people in this kind of contemporary day of age, they feel deprived of, especially. I mean, with the left, I can't say that's I wouldn't say that's the kind of straight formula or the recipe that they need to do, is they need to just make egregores and that's going to get people together. But I think that is probably one aspect, is kind of the social media presence and kind of thinking that these types of tactics are perverted, these types of tactics are, you know, what these kind of strong, dominant male men are doing, and, you know, they're completely disgusting and so forth. I think that's an element that I think should be challenged, and I think something like the alt-woke manifesto is really good in kind of engaging and addressing that. To not feel shame, to not feel necessarily that, you know, we're more pure or we're more virtuous, or that we shouldn't go to these types of tactics because somehow, some way we need to appear as, you know, these kind of really pure people. You know, it's kind of working on this kind of purification, I think, narrative too, that somehow, some way we're not going to be contaminated by doing such things. And I think it also points out too that, you know, if kind of the left really needs to get Machiavellian in a way. I mean, that's politics for me.
Did I miss something? Is Hillary left? Is that, are we pulling a really example? Okay. I think it's interesting to bring up Hillary Clinton in this situation, though, because she also did a lot of research and work previously as a student on Saul Alinsky's work. And there's a lot of putrid, horrifying methods mentioned by Alinsky himself, and she was his pupil, or she followed his research and everything. So it's very interesting that when the tables turned or the tables flipped and she thought she could go with that kind of archetypal figure, not counting on a Trump campaign really literally accelerating the egregore and pushing it to the point of equality or even past that, and taking 200 years of American memetics building up for putting a woman president in power. I don't think she counted on that other side of the acceleration effect of, I don't mean to use the word acceleration as in too far, but it's accelerated the memetics completely. So Trump was able to do it within 2 years, or drawing back before.
But just as an afterthought, I think there is an egregore for the left, but it's not quite like, the traditional Marxism, like predicated on historical materialism, which does not grant much agency to the individual. That's why it's not, kind of around anymore, it seems. What I'm getting at is that perhaps the new left, which you speak of, would be the egregore of the Guy Fawkes mask, sort of indexing anarchism, right? Where perhaps there you could find a similar approach, Antifa, etc. Perhaps a counter movement to the alt-right.
But isn't that the interesting thing? Because from what I'm understanding, and David and I, we have conversations, is some of the participants and some of the members of Anonymous actually started basically migrating over to 4chan and 8chan as well. So I think that's also kind of questionable to be.
Well, that's not quite questionable. I think it just sort of confirms the point, that they do
maybe
share
anonymity
certain ethics.
too, kind of this anonymity via the mask, because you can't really figure out these people's intentions, and not having certain or really clear intentions as to what your viewpoints or perspectives are, then that kind of gives you some lee room or some wiggle room to, basically say, now I'm part of 4chan, now I'm part of 8chan in a way. So maybe that could be an aspect of it. So, yes? Sorry.
Oh, you had the mic.
Well, too bad. I was thinking about in the whole kind of line of thought about the romanticization or whatever of the hacker, and this migration from 4chan and whatever kind of amphibian mentality platforms there are. Now we have, for example, Reddit, which is a very valid opposition to 4chan, and it also serves a kind of a bridge between the deep web and the surface level web, or whatever we call it. What do you think about what I wanted to say about Anonymous? I believe that they steadily became the opposition, the institutional opposition, and somehow inevitably destroyed themselves, because becoming the institutional opposition inevitably equals becoming the thing you're fighting against. So there is, on the other hand, on Reddit, there is this group, or I don't know how to call them, Cicada 3301. I don't know what they're all about, but definitely their whole movement is predicated on a huge amount of ambiguity, secrecy, and this kind of whole initiation process. How do you think that would work out if we consider that Reddit is a platform between the surface level web, the regular web that produces memes and so on, and the underbelly of the web?
If I may, I don't know if I can quite answer that, but you mentioned Anonymous and just that they sort of have lost traction, so to speak, that they've become devalued. Recently, there's a new altcoin which is called the Deep Onion, and actually each mascot at any sort of graphic display has this Guy Fawkes mask, and he's dressed as, let's say, a businessman or an astronaut, and so on. And I think it's interesting that what you actually get is the, first of all, the icon of the Guy Fawkes mask sort of appearing in this like very monetary sort of setting. The second thing is that Deep Onion runs through the Tor network, so what you're getting is kind of like this overlap, perhaps what you're speaking about, between the deep web and financial flows, which actually flow through the deep web, and complete anonymization of such currency flows. So again, you mentioned the sort of hybridity of Reddit. I think the hybridity is actually appearing somewhere else as well. So just saying.
It's a version of becoming that institution or institutionalizing to the fact that I wouldn't say Anonymous is institutionalized, but the same thing happened with Hillary and her campaign.
Occupy too. I mean, they were closely linked with Occupy.
Yeah. So it's a really good example across the board for that.
But I mean, even a lot of people formerly associated with Occupy also migrated over to this kind of 4chan, 8chan too. So I mean, I think that you can start clearly maybe not clearly, but there's some persons who were disenchanted too.
What is the? I don't like microphones. What's the identity of 4chan? Everybody presumes that it's, as you stated clearly, that it's a kind of amphibian kind of mentality, quote unquote. Doesn't that make 4chan lose leverage as some kind of an alternative to? Does it make it some kind of, I don't know?
I would call, 4chan is of course very broad, and you have the poll right forum, where most of this has been happening, politically correct, slash poll. I wanted to say something else, but actually it escaped my mind, so sorry.
It happens a lot.
Yeah, it happens.
Right.
Well,
It
escaped me, and it was like there was too much.
But I mean,
there was too much already that I wanted to say.
There's also other people. I mean, I feel probably who are also very well versed in 4chan and 8chan in the audience too. That can chip in. So, yeah.
I'm curious. What do you think will be happening in the next few years? Is the left or the governmental institutions fighting hybrid warfare or trying to uncover the sources that create all these fake websites about Hillary and such and so on? Is this going to be like how the people, the government or whatever, will tackle the problem with, which I myself consider, some sort of a trend, social trend, or do you think Dustin was talking about, the left should, become Machiavellian and just get together and fight them over or whatever,
I didn't say they should become Machiavellian. That's not.
Yeah.
I wasn't.
Well, there's
normative
like
wise.
one of the alternative solutions to the problem.
No,
but like, what do you think would be better, or what do you think might happen?
If you want to go. Yeah.
You really.
No, I just want to make that disclaimer. I wasn't necessarily saying they need to be Machiavellian. I'm just saying don't be afraid to kind of employ these types of tactics that they are using towards you, because I think what this book focuses on, and one of the interesting things that you're going to really have to confront and face, is really in this day of age, we are kind of living in the hegemony of transgression. I mean, transgression, if anything, is what keeps the images going. It's what keeps the attention economy going. It's what keeps you glued to the screen. So this kind of idea that I'm saying that I think the left needs to change its tactics in the manner that, as much as I'm all for talking about equality, as much as I'm all for talking about marginalization and all these kind of things that, yes, a lot of people hold true and dear to their heart, that we need to get more representation of certain types of groups. You are fighting a huge behemoth where none of these guys are going to take it seriously. When you're kind of, posting images of, children in Africa who are starving, or posting images of people who are obviously been beaten. I mean, you can watch these, you watch these videos. I mean, these guys are peddling the videos where they're out at the rallies. And when they're out at the rallies, they're just cheering on, and they're really happy to see that, you're out there and you're beating that snowflake, you're beating that leftist and so forth. So I mean, if I'm saying anything, I think the left really, they need to get as aggressive, and they need to get out there to also fight and defend themselves. I mean that in the broadest sense, not saying they need to be physically aggressive and start hurting people, but they need to also, but I mean, that could be up for consideration. We've had some interesting conversations that I think more or less can work in terms of camouflaging yourself and going into the rallies, camouflaging yourself as one of those alt-right neo-Nazis, and then somehow, some way, trying to make it implode, where you're dressing up like them, where you're kind of giving these kind of, where you're also maybe spreading the mass confusion, because you know how these guys have to work. They have to spread information. They have to, coordinate with each other. So I think also kind of getting in that method, as I was talking about with obfuscation, but more in terms of disruption. I think it comes down to trying to disrupt their communication channels as much as possible. So go on their boards if you want, and sign up as one of those users, actively partake, actively try to disrupt the communication channel where you're posting false information or posting fake rallies or fake events. I mean, that's how it works.
There's bots to do that.
And bots as well to do that.
I think you don't have to do it yourself.
Yeah, no, I really think that is a strategy to strongly consider if you want to kind of combat.
Of the position.
Yeah, yeah, but intensifying that. It is risky, but
I think it can build on your point of the difference in the channels and the left side and the right side. I think there is still a continuity of the neoliberal narrative going on through these institutions and through this, and it's called disinformation today, or disinformation ops, or these kind of things. And for a lot of people, disinformation is a concept that has a very different meaning if you're familiar with the disinformation manuals about occultism and things like that. So this is another side or term that's been co-opted and put into neoliberal classes. So there's EU disinformation, news feeds and stuff like that. And then the other term that goes with that is strategic communications. So this is another arm of public relations in governments now that deals strictly with the disinformation. So how to undo disinformation. So they weed it out and put it together. With that, it's something where this new left or this new direction it needs to take that is not in that previous narrative, I guess you can say, and it's been hidden. Then the difference with that is that this right side, this alt-right, if what do you want to call it, utilizes a kind of monolithic anonymity. So you might use the same alias forever, where you have other schools, you have other groups like, we'll say, jihadists that are actually hunted down in this environment, and their accounts are canceled. So they have to maintain some form of communication through all the canceling and all the disappearances, and they have some form of meeting point that's known off digital realm, and they can all. This is the hive mind that we're getting to. So there's a certain hive mind that builds out of it. Because you have to constantly change your persona, your identity, to maintain that anonymity, versus the monolithic. This is who I am. I'm Ken Jones.
I agree.
I'm on Reddit, and I'm looking for people who also hate Hillary Clinton. You can keep that same persona forever.
So it's just a cognitive security. It's an inverse cognitive security of also being aware that, you're going to be watched, you're going to be monitored. These people can expect your moves. I mean, that's why for me, frankly, as much as demonstrations might be nice to have and protest, I mean, that's a very easy response that the government is expecting. That's a very easy response that these guys are expecting from you. So you're really going to have to start conceiving of different types of tactics, whether it's going on the message boards, whether it's disrupting them from internally, where you do more or less act like a mole and somehow, some way completely find a way to undermine them. That can be an aspect. Or it's also finding out alternative ways, such as using Tor, not just Tor, but I think that's a decent example we could talk about, but using these kind of encrypted networks to organize such things if you still do want to do demonstrations and protest. It's just your governments and these institutions, they can keep pushing things. They'll keep pushing things past because they know they're going to get people out on the street. And what are they going to do when people are out on the streets? They've got the surveillance there. So they can start profiling you, and once they can start profiling you, they can start building up and start tracking you. So that's another thing that the left has to strongly consider. I mean, I think for me, one of the best papers I've read lately is kind of about cyber nihilism. It's actually really, I'll send it sometime. But I really think it's, in terms of its tactic and strategy, I think it really points to, if you really want to have systemic global change, start attacking the financial institutions and hacking the financial institutions. Use the ransomware. Seriously, use the ransomware, because you look at these ransomware attacks. I mean,
I think
Yeah, I mean, it's
Security's
one.
a little more
yeah.
robust than that.
I know. They're far more robust. I'm not thinking this is an easy job, but I mean, look at that, $1 billion that is basically institutions can lose. So I mean, if you can find a way, I mean, I think that's a far more effective strategy than, as this paper was talking about, where in India there's over 150 million workers who came out on a protest, but this protest didn't manage to really transform anything internally. This is what's going to do it, because think about it. It decreases the opportunity cost, and it decreases the amount of money that basically for any of these types of groups or organizations to bail out, let's say, one of their members from jail, because you're probably going to, if you're an anarchist or whatever it may be, you're going to have to pay for your friend to come out of jail, or you just let him stay there. Where, as opposed to here, I mean, more and more it's decreased, the decreased amount or the decreased amount to buy such things as these kind of botnets or these ransomwares. That's kind of enabling technically everyone to be a desktop revolutionary, if you want. So
it doesn't take going deep either.
No, it doesn't.
That's the.
But I'm not. This is probably not good. I just had myself recorded saying this. So. Yeah, so hopefully we can probably eliminate this part. Yeah. But I think that would actually be a legitimate strategy. I mean, even with using this kind of artificial intelligence and using the kind of Barack Obama and using your political leaders, and I think for me that's what's going to beat Trump, is actually creating something like not only this, but I think using that kind of strategy where I would, do what they just did with Obama and have Trump saying certain things, because he's all about calling out people with fake news. I mean, this is the thing too, is, if you can make it more an effort for him to have to keep denying these types of claims that he said such things, you have to use the tactics same right back on him. Because for me, Trump he is the media. He's done everything to make himself the media. I mean, just think about when he utters any type of word, stocks go down, media's already, disseminating everything he's saying, and you can already see that people are in such anguish, they're in such depression, and there's such anxiety. You could think about how just one figure has really elevated himself to such a divine role, to have such a massive influence on it as well.
John Oliver's been trying, honestly, this way. He's been trying to get these advertisements in at Fox News points for Trump.
Yeah, the catheter, the cowboy.
Yeah. It's pretty effective. No, it's not effective. But in this kind of mimetic warfare, collateral damage isn't really assessed. You can't just aim for Trump and hope to stick to Trump.
You definitely can't. It's far more complex and sophisticated in that case. I mean, what I'm proposing here, I'm not saying it's, you simply could just buy something and it's going to work. It definitely does not work like that. But, I mean, I think these are strategies to consider.
You can't abstain, you can't boycott. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Well, I think it also taps to this kind of chronopolitics we live in. I mean, we really do live in the age of time. Time is a commodity, it's time pressure, you have to make decisions fast. And whoever is kind of, on kind of the higher echelon of making the decisions also is the one who kind of can command and determine our time structure and how we kind of respond to these things. Okay, sorry, just stop talking. Okay.
Any further questions before we? Do we have a time slot? I came in late, so I get 15 minutes extra.
I think.
Do we want to expand?
Last question.
I also have
okay.
Perhaps too long. So I'll just pass it on.
No, just came to my mind that you mentioned this that Facebook research project that actually tried to influence certain user groups by feeding positive or negative information, but it's kind of an obvious, right? So I would say, like, if I feed something positive, then maybe the people will act positively, and vice versa, and that's not really difficult to find out. But when the mass groups of users are being observed by artificial intelligence, sometimes the outcomes comes pretty weird, actually. So we don't really understand why only people who like elephants and wearing blue t-shirt act like this, And this is a kind of software which is being used by banks, an example, to realize if the clients are good clients or not, because we don't know why it is so, but we know what type of person we need. We need to look at, but we don't understand why. So, and I also heard that this tactic is being used as a kind of manipulative tactic, as a kind of a weapon, but I didn't really read any practical example, and you might have some example of that kind, which is using this like deep research neural network systems that can actually read the the users in a different way.
I'll add a quick note on that to give another example where that's a perfect example. I was at a conference, I think 2 weeks ago, where it came up quite succinctly on that note with the neural networking that has these strange correlations that show results that are actionable. LAPD and Chicago police both utilize models that were built for monitoring earthquakes to predict where crimes will take place. So the models that take place, we still don't know how earthquake prediction modeling works, but we use it and it is becoming more effective and we're honing in on it. But these police departments use this model that's designed for something else, something very natural, and it's predicting human behavior. So it's weird correlations that are coming through, and maybe there's just some bottom line that we don't understand in top of it. So it's completely outside of our observation, I think, at this moment. I mean, chaos theory down to it, if you want it.
But more like the opposite, so it would be the implication of these results as an influence to certain groups. Do you think it's possible or applicable?
I think it's already shown with memetics that it is causing actionable, and this is hyperstition down to it, where you have on one side a government agency or a government institution that we trust and we believe in, and we as humans are looking at it from an observable perspective and putting our faith in its ability to do that. I think there's something outside of it that we are not looking at, we're not able to see. So I think it goes through with both of those.
We're here like for more than 1 3/4 hour. So like if somebody has a punchline.
Going for beers very soon, so come with us. We can finish any discussion which might be sort of still, on the table.
You stole my punchline.
Yeah.
That's not a punchline, that's a beer line.
Okay, but thank you all so much for coming, and I think this is like a marvelous conclusion of the whole Wednesdays on AVU, and like I still do have to remember the institutional background and the fights we have even not on the social media, but even here. But thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you like next year.
Thank you.